There is a mountain on the southern edge of Colorado Springs with 15 buildings inside it, 2,000 feet down, and not one of them is sitting on the ground. They sit on steel springs. More than 1,300 of them, each about 4 feet long and 20 inches across, each rated to 65,000 pounds. There is an 18-inch gap between the buildings and the granite. Every pipe that enters them is flexible. The whole assembly is designed to move about an inch and then stop. It is not abandoned, not mothballed, not decommissioned, not a museum you can buy a ticket for. It is running right now. The United States built a generation of hardened command bunkers in the 50s and 60s. Raven Rock, Mount Weather, the Greenbrier, under a resort hotel in West Virginia. Almost all of them followed the same arc, built in secret, quietly obsoleted, then mothballed, declassified, or turned into a tour. Cheyenne Mountain is the one they emptied out and then started refilling. Two things about this place that almost nobody knows. On the one morning the mountain was actually needed, the man in charge of it was stuck in traffic. And when the government finally decided to move out, its own analysis said the move took the mission from mostly survivable to almost certainly dead. Both of those come later. Stay with me for the second one. This is the story of the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. Why they dug it, what it cost, and why the reason they left is the same reason they came back. To understand why anyone would put a command post inside a mountain, you have to understand what they were trying to get away from. NORAD was activated in September 1957 at Ent Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. Ent was an ordinary base. Its Combat Operations Center, opened in 1954, was a concrete block building of about 15,000 square feet. General Earl Partridge had already looked at it and concluded it would not survive a nuclear bomb. Weeks later, the Soviet Union put Sputnik into orbit. That ended the argument. Whatever can put a satellite over Colorado can put a warhead on it. Colorado Springs had been chosen in the first place for a reason that sounds obvious once you say it out loud. It sits near the middle of the continent. It is about as far as you can get, inside the United States, from Soviet bomber bases and Soviet missile fields. A warning system is only useful if it is still alive when the warning arrives. NORAD's own deputy historian has made that point publicly. So the command was there. What the Air Force needed next was hard rock, close by. Cheyenne Mountain is a triple-summited mass rising to 9,565 feet, directly behind the southern edge of the city. The rock is Precambrian granite, roughly 2 billion years old, dense, coherent, and critically, self-supporting over long spans once you cut into it. That last property is the entire reason the project was possible. It is what lets you open a chamber 60 feet high in solid rock and not build a roof to hold it up. The mountain was also already in use. There was an antenna farm on the high central point, put there in the 50s to serve a growing city, and a road that reached it. This was not virgin ground. It was a mountain the Air Force could already get equipment onto. In 1961, there was no machine anywhere that could bore chambers of that cross-section through granite. So the work was drill and blast, and the contract went to a mining company, Utah Construction and Mining, rather than to a general builder. The Army Corps of Engineers brought in Clifton W. Livingston of the Colorado School of Mines to consult specifically on controlled blasting, smooth wall technique, break the rock you want gone without fracturing the rock you need to keep. In an ordinary tunnel, overblasting is a cosmetic problem you fix with concrete. Here, the surrounding granite was the armor. Damaging it was a failure of the weapon system. Then, there is the springs question, which is the part people find hardest to believe. A nuclear detonation nearby does not crush a deep chamber, it moves it. Ground shock arrives through the rock, and you cannot build a structure rigid enough to ignore it. So the design gave up on rigidity completely. Freestanding steel buildings, resting on springs, held clear of the walls, with flexible connectors on every pipe, so that the whole assembly rides the shock instead of resisting it. That is a 1961 answer. The engineers who arrived at it were not fools working with primitive tools. They were working with 1961, and 1961 could not make anything stiff enough. The design was not a preference. The design was the rock. Utah Construction won the excavation contract on the 2nd of May, 1961. Work began on the 18th. The official groundbreaking came a month later on the 16th of June when two generals set off symbolic dynamite charges at the same moment. By late December, the excavation was 53% complete. On the 20th, 200 workers walked off the job. The project manager called it a wildcat strike. The trigger was a man fired for disobeying a safety rule. Everyone came back 3 days later, and the fired worker got his job back. In August 1962, the digging was nearly finished when engineers found a geological fault running through the ceiling at one of the tunnel intersections. Work stopped. They poured and bolted a concrete dome from above, at a cost of $2.7 million, before anyone continued. Excavation finally completed on the 1st of May, 1964. The building contract went to Continental Consolidated in February 1963. $6,969,000 for 11 buildings on springs, totaling 170,000 square feet. The Air Force describes 15 buildings in there today. The original contract was for 11. Both numbers sit in official documents, and I have not found the paperwork that reconciles them. The estimate at the start was $66 million. Full operational capability came on the 6th of February, 1967. The final figure was $142.4 million. Here's the detail that tells you what this world was actually like before the mountain. CONAD tracked North American airspace from a windowless cinder block building in downtown Colorado Springs, in front of a transparent lucite map 3 stories high. Airmen stood on scaffolding behind the map and wrote on it, which means they wrote backwards, in grease pencil, for an entire shift. Inside the mountain, the details are stranger for being ordinary. Outside the tunnel portal, there is a softball field, a sand volleyball court, a putting green, a horseshoe pit, and a picnic area called Mountain Man Park. Crews are taken up to the portal on a white bus. In peacetime, the blast doors at the entrance are usually left standing open. The command center itself, as described to reporters in 2018, is about 40 feet square. 8 video screens, soft lighting, muted colors, sound-absorbing surfaces. Everyone who has seen a film about this place expects a hall. It is a meeting room, and there are cots for most of the personnel, with separate suites for senior officers. Somebody sat down, in the design of a facility meant to function through the end of civilization, and decided that rank should still get a better room. Real quick, if you're getting something out of this, the best thing you can do is watch it through or hit subscribe. That's it. Back to the mountain. The mountain did not move freight. What it moved was the authority to believe a warning. Before 1966, data from the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System and the Distant Early Warning Line arrived at a building that could not survive the attack it was reporting. From 1965, Bell Laboratories connected the new Combat Operations Center to the National Telecommunications Network through a set of blast-resistant relay nodes sited between 30 and 120 miles out, with paths that rerouted automatically if one was lost. Radar data from across North America, from the United Kingdom, from Greenland, could now reach the mountain by more than one road. The economic consequence was the city itself. Ent, Fort Carson, Peterson, the Air Force Academy, later Schriever, Colorado Springs became a defense town, and the mountain was its anchor. You can measure it in land. When the state park on the eastern flank was created in 2000, the acreage involved had previously been slated for large-scale residential and commercial development, and it produced one thing that outlasted its own mission. A binational command, with Royal Canadian Air Force personnel working inside a United States Department of Defense facility continuously for 60 years. That arrangement is genuinely unusual. It is still running. There is one more thing that came out of that cinder block building downtown, and it is not what you would expect. On the 30th of November, 1955, not Christmas Eve, whatever you have been told, a phone rang on the desk of Colonel Harry Shoup at Continental Air Defense Command. It was the hotline to the Pentagon. 2 people had that number. A child's voice asked whether he was Santa Claus. What Shoup told the wire service the following day is on the record, and it is not the version you know. He said there might be a man called Santa Claus at the North Pole, but he was not the one Shoup worried about coming from that direction. The warmer telling, the ho-ho-ho, the reassurance, the Christmas Eve setting, accumulated later, including from Shoup himself. The cause was a Sears advertisement inviting children to phone Santa directly. Whether the number was misprinted or the child misdialed has never been settled, and NORAD's own historians say so plainly. Shoup put airmen on the calls anyway. On Christmas Eve, his staff drew a sleigh on the lucite map. He let it stay. All of that happened 11 years before the mountain opened. In the flimsy building the mountain was dug to replace. The complex was built to fail in one specific way. It failed in a completely different one. The protection is a chain. 2,000 feet of granite overburden, a tunnel geometry arranged so that blast over pressure passes through and out the far side rather than piling against a door. Blast doors of about 25 tons. Then the springs, to absorb whatever ground shock comes through the rock anyway. The design intent was survival of a very large detonation at distance. It was never survival of a direct hit. By the 1970s, the people working inside understood the arithmetic had turned against them. Soviet missiles had become accurate as well as large. A retired Air Force officer who served there wrote afterwards that the citadel built to guarantee survival was, by then, certain to be among the first targets struck, perhaps a dozen warheads or more, aimed specifically to make sure of it. Their job, as he described it, was not to live, it was to detect the attack and coordinate the answer before they were gone. That is the failure mode nobody could engineer around. Here's the one that actually happened. On the 9th of November, 1979, someone loaded a training tape into a live warning system. The tape simulated a Soviet submarine-launched attack. 10 interceptors were scrambled from 3 bases in the United States and Canada. Missile bases went to a low level of alert. The National Emergency Airborne Command Post was notified. 6 minutes in, satellite data had confirmed nothing, and officials concluded there was nothing to respond to. 7 months later, it happened again, 3 times over 10 days. On the 3rd of June, 1980, the system reported 2,200 inbound missiles. Bomber and tanker crews went to their aircraft. The Airborne Command Post taxied into position. The Federal Aviation Administration prepared to order every commercial airliner in American airspace to land. The Pentagon traced it to a failed integrated circuit and a badly designed message format. A computer inside the mountain had begun making what amounted to typographical errors in routine launch reports. The chip cost 46 cents. None of this was freak bad luck. The 427M upgrade, declared fully operational in 1979, was later assessed as wholly ineffective, and it was not replaced until around 1992. A 1981 report from the General Accounting Office was titled, "Without Decoration, NORAD's Missile Warning System. What Went Wrong?" Among the corrective measures was a separate offline computer for testing changes before they went live, which had been proposed earlier and rejected because there was not the money. General James Hardinger's defense, given in 1983, was that the system handled about 6,700 messages every hour through 1979 and 1980 and processed all of them correctly. That is also true. Both things are true at once, and that is the whole problem. The human ledger on this project is thin, and I want to be honest about why. I could not find a construction fatality figure, not zero, not found. 3 years of drill and blast excavation in granite, 693,000 tons of rock removed in the early 1960s. A count of 0 would be remarkable. The document most likely to hold the answer is a 1966 Bureau of Mines study on the methods and costs of the excavation, and I have not been able to read it. So I am not going to give you a number. What is documented is smaller and quieter. The strike in December 1961, 200 men, 3 days, began because a worker was fired for disobeying a safety rule, and there was a ranch. The JL Ranch had been on the eastern flank of Cheyenne Mountain since 1936, built up by the Jones family to about 2,200 acres. Colorado's own Parks Service records what happened next in a single clause. Construction of the Combat Operations Center in 1961 led to the ranch relocating to Montana, over water. That is the entire entry. A family left the state. In 2000, 1,680 acres of that same ranch, everything south of NORAD Road, became a state park. Now the traffic. On the morning of the 11th of September 2001, General Ralph Eberhart, commander of NORAD, was at Peterson Air Force Base. He was not in the mountain. Getting to the mountain took him about 45 minutes by road, and somewhere along the way, he lost a cell phone call with the vice president. The order authorizing the shoot-down of a hijacked airliner was given while he was still driving. 5 minutes after United 93 went into a field in Pennsylvania. Repeater stations went in almost immediately to fix the phone problem. And Congress started putting money into Peterson. A building already under construction there was expanded to hold a NORAD operations center shared with the newly created Northern Command. The decision itself came from Eberhardt's successor. Admiral Timothy Keating took over in November 2004, identified command and coordination problems during an exercise in 2005, and in February 2006 ordered a $100,000 internal study of how the two commands actually worked. On the 28th of July 2006, he announced the result. Cheyenne Mountain would go to warm standby. His reasoning: intelligence assessed a missile attack from Russia or China as very unlikely, and in a netted, distributed world, the work could be done at Peterson, one push button from the president, as he put it. He also mentioned that running the mountain fully staffed cost about $250 million a year. The objection was immediate. John Pike of Global Security put it most plainly. At a moment when bunkers were coming back into fashion, the best one the country ever had was being closed. Raven Rock and Mount Weather had both been reactivated after 2001. The House Armed Services Committee ordered a review because NORAD had not produced a written report on the move. The resulting document is titled, with its own conclusion, "Full costs and security implications of Cheyenne Mountain realignment have not been determined." Reporting on the draft briefing says no cost-benefit analysis was conducted at all. The move itself was costed at $41.6 million. The replacement was Peterson Air Force Base, 10 miles east on the plain, above ground. What made that possible was not a new machine. It was the disappearance of one threat model and the arrival of a new organization. The threat model was a massive, warned ballistic first strike from a peer state, precisely the thing the mountain was dug for, and in 2006 the assessment said it was very unlikely. The organization was Northern Command, created at the end of 2002 as the Homeland Defense Arm, which put a second four-star headquarters in the same city and made two crews doing overlapping work look impossible to justify. And there is an enabler nobody planned. September 11th built the Peterson facility. The building that absorbed the NORAD Operations Center existed because Congress opened the money after Eberhardt's drive. The replacement was constructed by the failure it was meant to answer. Then it went into reverse. Between January 2010 and June 2011, the Missile Warning Center inside the mountain was renovated with strategic command funding, and day-to-day work moved back in. In April 2015, Admiral William Gortney announced a $700 million contract with Raytheon to move systems back into the complex. His stated reason was one sentence long: because of the way Cheyenne Mountain is built, it is hardened against electromagnetic pulse. It is described as the only underground Department of Defense facility certified to take a high-altitude EMP. Read that carefully. The argument for leaving in 2006 was that everything is netted and distributed now. The argument for going back is that the mountain is the one place a network cannot reach. Same fact. Opposite conclusion. 9 years apart. Ent Air Force Base, the building that could not survive, was decommissioned. Its site is now the United States Olympic and Paralympic Training Center. The Chidlaw Building downtown held NORAD headquarters from 1963 until 1988, when headquarters moved to Peterson. Aerospace Defense Command, the organization built around intercepting manned bombers, was inactivated in 1980 because the bombers had been replaced by missiles, and there was nothing left to intercept in the way it had been designed to. The Space Control Center left the mountain for Vandenberg in California in 2006 as part of the same wave. Staffing inside fell to roughly a tenth of its historic level. The NORAD and Northern Command functions that made the place famous are now a small fraction of what happens in there. The unit that ran the installation was inactivated in 2019 and folded into another. That organization now sits under Space Base Delta I in the Space Force, and the ranch land went to the state park, except for the northern 520 acres, which stayed with the Vancouver Investment Company. One more thing about the mountain, which is the most visible object on it and has nothing whatsoever to do with NORAD. On the high central point, there is a broadcast transmitter site of more than 40 acres, above 9,500 feet. It carries most of the FM, television, and two-way radio for El Paso County, Pueblo, and Fountain, and its coverage reaches the Denver metro. It was built in the 1950s, before the excavation, to serve a city growing on military money. The gate uses a chain of series locks so that the fire department, the police, and every broadcaster can each remove their own padlock and open it without needing anyone else's key. At night, the red aircraft warning lights on those towers are how you find Cheyenne Mountain from anywhere in Colorado Springs. which means the thing everybody uses to point at the bunker is not the bunker. It is a radio installation that got there first. Here is what is actually up there now. Cheyenne Mountain Space Force Station is an active installation, managed by Space Base Delta 1 out of Peterson. Inside the complex, NORAD's Alternate Command Center, United States Northern Command, Space Command's Missile Warning Center, the Air Weather Service, FEMA, and a Civil Defense Warning Function. The blast valves and the chemical, biological, and radiological filtration network are maintained by an engineering installation squadron of the Minnesota Air National Guard, which is not a sentence I expected to write either. You cannot go in. There are no public tours, and there is no realistic route to one. Media visits happen, and they are rare, escorted, and arranged through public affairs. The approach road is controlled, and the eastern flank is patrolled by an armed security forces squadron. If you go to look at this, look at it from the places you are allowed to be. Those places are good. Cheyenne Mountain State Park covers 2,701 acres on the eastern flank, with 29 miles of trail, and it sits directly south of NORAD Road. Open daily, 5 in the morning until 10 at night, for the price of a park pass. From the trails, you get the full gradient, prairie grassland, then Gamble Oak, then Ponderosa and Douglas Fir, and from parts of it you can see the antennas. That park is the JL Ranch, the same ground the family left in 1961. NORAD Road itself is the line, an ordinary Colorado County road, state park on one side, alternate command center for the aerospace defense of North America on the other. And from elevation on that flank you can see Peterson, 10 miles east on the plain, the mountain and the thing that replaced it, in a single view from public land, for nothing. Below all of it, Interstate 25 and Highway 115 carry tens of thousands of people a day past the southern edge of the city. Most of them are looking at a mountain with radio towers on it. So, the second thing I promised you at the start. In 2007, after the decision, the Colorado Springs Independent obtained documents that a Pentagon spokeswoman confirmed reflected the Defense Department's own analysis. The finding was this: the mountain had much higher survivability than the Peterson building across several scenarios. Without the mountain, 3 concerted conventional or asymmetric attacks would severely degrade the ability to monitor the situation at all. And by 2020, a small fraction of a Chinese arsenal would be 99% assured of destroying the surveillance mission if it sat at Peterson, against up to an 85% chance that the mission survives inside the mountain, mostly survivable, to almost certainly dead, in the department's own numbers. And separately, the finding that no cost-benefit analysis had been done at all. What the mountain never provided was the thing it had been sold as providing. What it cost, quietly, was a ranch and its water, recorded in one clause of a state park timeline. Nobody counted that either. 693,000 tons of granite, more than 1,300 springs, a 46-cent chip. The complex was not badly built. It was built exactly as well as 1961 knew how, on the only principle 1961 had available: if you cannot make it stiff enough, let it move, and the engineering held. Nothing in the rock failed. What changed was the accuracy of the weapons outside it, and then the shape of the threat, and then the shape of the threat again. That is the thing about hardening. It is a bet on what the next weapon will be, and the concrete always sets before the answer comes in. They kept the mountain. What they lost was the belief that being inside it would save them. The Greenbrier, under a hotel in West Virginia, was exposed in 1992 and became a paid tour. Raven Rock, in Pennsylvania, was never demoted at all and got quietly re-emphasized after 2001. Cheyenne Mountain is the one that went both ways. If you grew up in Colorado Springs, tell me in the comments what the adults told you about the mountain and how old you were when you worked out that the reason your city had all those bases was that it was a target.